All right, hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We're starting a new book, Exodus, and the Old Testament breakdown is, when you look at the first section of the Old Testament, it is a historical look. So we're getting an historical view of the history of Israel. I'll come back to that in a moment. But the from Genesis all the way to Esther is that historical view, and then you're going to go into another section, which is typically the books of literature, as they're called. So from Job to the Songs of Solomon, and then you go into the prophetic picture. So the major and minor prophets. And each of the sections, when the outline of the books, typically, and as they believe to be in the order in which it is written, and also the timing. So when we come back to the book of Exodus, which is the second book, it is believed that Moses is the writer of the first 5 books, which means they possibly written at the same time or doing his journey. And that's what we see in the first 5 books, that they take us from the beginning of creation all the way through Moses' death, and then Joshua brings the children of Israel into the promised land. Exodus is now ushering the next generation, but also establishing the nation of Israel. In other words, he's dealing with Israel as not just a group of pilgrims, but the nation itself. So it's going to take us through the slavery period, their deliverance, and then God establishing them as a nation. And then Numbers, we're going to go on with Numbers. I don't get into a lot of the scholarly debate, and there is a lot of scholarly debate. So if you have study Bibles, you can read on that. And here's why. First of all, I'm not a scholar. I have not done the primary research on all of these debates. So even when people debate whether or not if Moses wrote, these books or not, there has been some other thoughts that I've read periodically that maybe Ezra, written at an even later date. I don't get into all of that. I can accept the general consensus that Moses wrote the first 5 books, and then we'll get to the other authors later, but certainly Moses was instructed to write, and so we'll see this as we go on. But even if Moses is not the author, the revelation of Scripture is what's most important. And this is what I mean. And even when we talk about why we hold the canon, the Bible, the 66 books of the Bible, as God's word to us, and this is important, we reject what is called extra biblical books. Now, what makes the difference in the two? And this is important. What we believe is inspired by God to write, the revelation that he gave to us, his people. The message is what divides the canon or the inspired books from non-biblical, extra-biblical. Some of them are called the apocryphal books. Some people say that there are lost books. There's no lost books or rejected books. Well, correction, there are rejected books, but they They are not inspired books. So they're apocryphal books. There are people who are saying, well, if the church put these books out because they reveal truths that would topple Christianity. No, it didn't. The reason why any book is rejected from the scriptures, any book, the reason why any book is rejected from the scriptures is because they do not fit in the revelation, the message, or the revelation. There is a continual message beginning in Genesis and ending in Revelation. That is one of the tests that if a book is discovered to be or has said to be an inspired book, they can say, here is the test. So we see the continual revelation from God through his men, or those who he's chosen to speak for him. I'll get to that more, especially in the book of Numbers. But the revelation of the message is most important. That is a continual revelation from all 66 books. And that is important. If a book is discovered, and there are plenty of writings that could, lost writings, they would fit in the revelation. That's the difference there. In other words, how you would uphold them is that they don't. So if a book comes and the author decides, well, and you could tell that he's writing of his own thoughts, right? Of his own, and these are how you would reject that. Okay. So now Exodus follows the storyline of Israel, but what is the purpose? The revelation, how God is going to continue the bloodline that will ultimately lead to Jesus being born. That's the main thought. Subplots is the storyline of Israel. That's it. But the main is the descendants of Abraham through Judah all the way to Christ. That's the main storyline there. If you want to put a date on the timeline of Exodus in terms of the writing of Exodus, could be anywhere from 12 to 1500 BC. The dating itself, in terms of where the story takes place, goes a lot further. Interesting thing is the book of Job, the dating of the book of Job, the actual would be probably around 2000. So if we begin here with the book of Exodus, okay, we have within, let's say, the opening of Exodus, what we have is the 400 years of slavery. You have about 400 years of the judges, and about another 500, years of the period of the kings. Okay, and then what you have is the Babylonian exile, and then there's what's a 500-year period of what's called the Dark Ages, when there's no revelation, and then Jesus comes. So that's why I say I don't get into a lot of the debates, because to me this period of time is more, if you want to look at it, going to be anywhere from 500 to 2000. But again, I'm not the expert in that. All right. So as we closed out the book of Genesis, Joseph died. He was 110 years. Then we see that his great-grandchildren, I think it's third generation, right? So it's great or great-great-grandchildren. He was alive as he passes on the torch to them. Let's get into this. And this is, let's see here. All right. All right. So it verse 1 opened up says, "These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob. Each came with his family: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher." So this is the names here, and he said this is who came, all right, to Egypt, and then the total number of Jacob's descendants was 70. Joseph was already there. So then he said, verse 6, "Then Joseph and all of his brothers and all of that generation died. But the Israelites were fruitful and increased rapidly, multiplied, and became extremely numerous, so that the land was filled with them." Verse 8, "And a new king, who had not known Joseph, came to power in Egypt." Now let me stop there, because I wanted a couple of things. You remember that Israel, that when Israel came to Egypt because of the famine, they gave them the best land. Now you remember I said then to remember the statement that they were extremely grateful to God's favor through Joseph. God had given Pharaoh a dream that only Joseph could interpret. They recognized God's favor and were extremely grateful to that. All right, so now they come to Egypt. Joseph has died, several generations passed, and then he says a new king, or Pharaoh. Pharaoh is just a title that was passed on. It was a king, but the title passed on through the successors, usually the sons. When he says that Pharaoh did not know Jacob, the word "know" is very important to understand, because it's not like they didn't have history. And it's the word is not used that way, but it's not like they didn't know and say, well, who is this Joseph? Who are all these people, right? In other words, the history was passed on. However, how the history was passed on is kind of interesting, because we deal with the same thing today. There are people right now who deny the Holocaust, right? So you got a generation of people that's denying the Holocaust. You have a generation of people that's saying that slavery, that the Civil War wasn't fought over slavery, right? So how do these things exist? Now keep this in mind, especially like with slavery, when we're dealing with the same kind of timeline. Well, a couple of things we need to understand. One is how history is repeated, right? In other words, all of a sudden you have this Pharaoh who's now looking at, why do we have all these Jews here? What's going on with that? What's with these people? So the history, in other words, they testify the history, so what's up with that? And how you calculate history is one thing, because this is exactly how you pervert. So for example, in the Civil War, which is just a little over 150 years, you have people who misrepresent what the history was. So for example, people will say, why do black people always making a big deal out of something that happened 200 years ago? Ancient history, right? But worse, there was a group of people called the Daughters of the revolution. And one of the things that they did was they began to rewrite history. And this is why you have people saying today, well, history wasn't fought over slavery, it fought over state rights. Well, state rights to do what? But the same thing exists in that they know slavery existed. So why did slavery exist? They know it happened, so why? There was a concerted effort to kind of rewrite the history. So that's one. That is one perspective. When the new Pharaoh looked around, history was already been these people. You demonize those people. Remember, Joseph was beloved in Egypt, and now he's not. Even when his family came, they were beloved. So what happened? We have generations today, people who are denying the Holocaust existed. They deny, right? Oh, there's no Holocaust. Right now. So now we see that then you have the word no can be used in the same context. Here's a good example. When it talks about Adam and Eve, it said, and Adam knew his wife. Adam knew his wife. That was mean it was not just conveying the sexual activity, but it was conveying the results, the union from the sexual activity, the experience, the connection. So at some point, Pharaoh and Egypt lost the connection to Egypt, meaning God used these people, and they missed that point, that God used these people to save our nation. In other words, if God had said, instead of going to Egypt, we're going to go to Assyria, then Egypt would have withered away under the famine. But God used that nation. Well, they're not knowing that now. Now who are these people? So the hardening through their sinful nature is what's going on. So instead of looking at these people as a blessing that they were, they're now repulsed by them. All right, we're going to pick up with this, obviously, and in the next study, and go on with this, because again, their journey now as a nation, see, not just as a people, but as a nation, how God will birth the nation and preserve the nation. And then this is what we're going to go through with the book of Exodus. All right, guys, I will see you in the next study. All right.